Definitely gonna vote. I'm not sure how I feel about it yet. Still sitting on what I'm gonna do, but definitely gonna get out there.
Not too happy that there is an election at this particular time.
I think it was odd that there was an election called in the middle of the pandemic. I'm also going to vote. I think everyone should vote.
It's a toss-up. I don't think anybody has the proof that they can do a good job.
Well, we are just hours away from the polls opening. Good evening, I'm Marivelle Tarouk. Today marked the end of the federal election campaign. One of the key places to watch is the suburban riding ring around Toronto. It's home to millions of voters. CBC's Talia Ricci spoke to some of them in the riding of Markham-Stouffville.
For this group of friends in Stouffville, this Tim Hortons parking lot is a meeting spot.
We have a teacher, we have a worker, we have retired people. They just come here to talk and, enjoy each other's company.
Much of that talk has involved tomorrow's election.
Tired of politics. Hoping that OToole will get in.
What are some important issues for you?
Basically, the price of food. Price of gas, all this carbon tax.
I voted for the Green Party. I want to save a tree. Look around us in Stouffville. Building.
I'm voting Conservative. Military folks should not be homeless. They should have affordable housing. People who've worked 30, 40 years of their lives and they still can't afford where they live. It's just, so pensions are not big enough.
This member of the Friends Circle is leaning NDP, partly because he likes their leader, Jagmeet Singh.
It's just a gut feeling. He feels like a real people person, right?
And around town, more people shared their opinions.
I am a permanent resident in Canada, so I can't vote yet. If there will be any change, will be a change for the left, for a more progressive Canada. This is my hope.
How are you feeling ahead of the election tomorrow?
I'm not feeling hopeful, but I hope that PPC gets a seat in the House, because freedom over your body and any medical procedures is a basic human right, and so I don't agree with vaccine passports.
I still vote for Liberal because in general I think that is the other guy is still sort of new, especially in this timing. I prefer having the one that who already running the system.
Regardless of the result, expect some lively banter back at this parking lot tomorrow.
How did you all meet each other?
Just Tim Horton. Somebody held the door. Hello.
Talia Ricci, CBC News, Stouffville, Ontario.
Well, the Liberals and Conservatives are battling to form what polls suggest will be a minority government. Justin Trudeau spent the final hours pushing his party as the one to fight the pandemic.
We're seeing right now what the wrong choices made in Alberta and Saskatchewan have led to. We do not need a Conservative government that won't be able to show the leadership on vaccinations and on science.
The day saw a whirlwind agenda for Trudeau, with campaign stops in Quebec, Ontario, Manitoba, and British Columbia. Erin O'Toole campaigned in the Toronto area today, making a final pitch for the policies in his recovery plan and taking some final swings at Justin Trudeau for calling a snap election during a pandemic.
Mr. Trudeau put us into a $600 million election that is only about him.
The O'Toole campaign has spent the last 3 days in the Toronto region, targeting ridings where the race is close. Jagmeet Singh spent his last campaign day in British Columbia, and he took aim at what he said were Justin Trudeau's broken promises on issues such as housing and the environment.
Mr. Trudeau has done a lot of things that have been for show, and he's kind of made it sound like he cares. But it's been his actions that don't match up with his words that's really made people feel frustrated.
Singh said if he winds up holding the balance of power in a minority parliament, the main condition he'd set for his support would be increased taxes on Canada's most wealthy. Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet was telling voters today that a strong Bloc contingent in Parliament will help ensure the next government is a minority and strengthen his power to fight for the province.
I believe that if this is what Quebecers want, we will be stronger the morning after the election. We will get better results for Quebecers.
Blanchette visited 5 ridings today, 2 of them currently held by Liberal cabinet ministers. The pandemic has had devastating effects on Toronto's downtown, with many businesses still struggling to survive. That's got owners and business associations wondering why federal election candidates aren't promising more support for the city's core. Angelina King has more on what they say would help keep the downtown alive.
Well, the kitchen at Salad King has started to heat up. The unknowns haven't gone away.
We don't know how many students are going to be back, how many students are staying at home. We don't know how much of the office buildings are coming back.
With one location right beside Ryerson University and a new one about 1 kilometer away, about 3/4 of its customers are students, office workers, and people visiting downtown.
We're reliant on people coming into the core area.
Alan Liu says he'd like more federal subsidies for new businesses so there'd be fewer empty storefronts.
And we want the downtown to recover. We got to really accelerate that.
Just steps away from the restaurant at the busiest intersection in the country, foot traffic has slowed way down. The August before the pandemic, nearly 5 million people crossed Yonge and Dundas. This past August, 2.3 million. That's less than half.
We got to get them back into the downtown urban environments.
The Yonge Street BIA says to do that, major events must ramp back up. It says the area is a magnet for vulnerable people and those social inequities need to be addressed.
We need supportive housing for people that have mental health and addictions. So we'd like to see more money from the federal government to be put towards supportive housing.
Research shows only 9% of downtown office employees have returned to work in person. The International Downtown Association says the core is the barometer of a city's economic, cultural, and social well-being.
And for that reason, we need our elected officials to be paying more attention to how the issues identified in the election tie so directly to our downtowns.
The CBC asked the 3 major parties what they plan to do to help support downtowns. The Conservatives are touting their Rebuild Main Street plan, which would include a tax credit and interest-free loans. The Liberals are promising an extension to their hiring program and to provide the tourism industry with wage and rent support of up to 75%. And the NDP says it's the only party that wants to continue COVID business benefits like the wage subsidy until the pandemic is truly over. Meanwhile, business people like Liu say no matter who wins the election, they want all levels of government to work together.
To actually support the downtown area.
Saying it'll be a team effort to ensure downtown Toronto bounces back. Angelina King, CBC News, Toronto.
Ontario's proof of vaccination policy is set to take effect on Wednesday, leaving some businesses concerned over how they will navigate enforcement. Our Dahlia Ashery spoke to a gym owner who is bracing for the learning curve to come in just a few days.
You've got your piece of ID, and then you can show a digital version of your second vaccination.
Stacey Irvine is gearing up to greet her clients a little differently on Wednesday. Irvine is the co-owner of 5 gyms in Toronto, and like many other business owners across the province, she'll be required to ask her clients for proof of vaccination.
I wish we were not the vaccine police.
So far, Irvine says her clients are supportive of the new policy and that staff are trained should a conflict arise with a non-compliant client.
We're around. We're going to try to be around in those early days. And we would just ask the person to leave the facility.
Bioethicist Carrie Bowman says clashes are to be expected.
It is not surprising to me or anyone else that these mandates are generating conflict in our society.
Particularly when it comes to implementation and enforcement.
Who do we call if we have someone that's a problem? Do we call 911 or do we call our local police unit? Those are the things that I think we've been left in the dark about.
People running gyms, you know, if they take their job seriously, which many and most do, they're very concerned about the fact that, you know, that's part of their role is to bring people in and to encourage their health.
The city says it plans on taking an educational approach with businesses as the new rules roll out. The chair of Business Improvement Area in Roncesvalles says that will be a key factor.
There's a seminar that's provided by the city that provides methods for businesses to help identify conflict and what to do in the case of conflict. And the answer isn't always 911.
The city is urging the public to be respectful of businesses required to follow the provincial regulations, and concerns over non-compliance should be directed to 311 for investigation, and 911 calls should only be made if there is an immediate threat. Dahlia Ashry, CBC News, Toronto.
One person is dead after a shooting in Toronto's Regent Park neighborhood last night. Police responded to a call for several gunshots heard around 8 p.m. in the area of Oak and Sumac Streets. Officers found 2 victims and tried to provide first aid. After searching the area, a third victim was found. One of the people found was unresponsive and later died. The other victims suffered non-life-threatening injuries. The Guelph Police Service is investigating at least 4 complaints of female students' drinks being spiked with an unknown substance. Police say they received information from the University of Guelph. They say there have been no reports of assaults or physical injuries. This comes after reports that young women at Western University were drugged and sexually assaulted at a first-year residence last weekend. Police are reminding residents to be cautious and aware of their surroundings, and they're asking anyone with information to get in touch or contact Crime Stoppers. Well, for the second time in 6 weeks, a train has derailed on Ottawa's Confederation LRT line. It happened earlier this afternoon west of Tremblay Station. According to sources, 13 people were on board, but no one was injured. The Transportation Safety Board has been alerted, and in a tweet, Mayor Jim Watson said city staff were gathering information about this latest derailment and that the Transit Commission would be briefed tomorrow morning. At this point, it's not known how long the Confederation line will be shut down for. HIV service agencies are calling on the federal government to increase funding. The AIDS Committee of Toronto, or ACT, says they'll be receiving $450,000 less over the next 5 years. It's a widespread problem as the number of organizations requesting federal funding has increased dramatically. Dale Manukduk has the story.
This year's AIDS Walk was transformed into a rally for health. Gathering at the memorial for Torontonians who lost their lives to AIDS, some say their community organizations are dying a slow death.
The funding that we need to be able to continue the work that we do is starting to become non-existent.
The AIDS Committee of Toronto received notice in July that its next round of federal funding, which is meant solely for time-limited projects, is being canceled because the application for funding across Ontario has increased 400%.
That says to me there is a demand for this work, and what they shouldn't be doing is cutting back. They should be investing more.
In a statement to CBC News, the Public Health Agency of Canada writes investments in community-based projects continue to be a pillar of our strategy and have remained stable for the past decade. But HIV service advocates say stable isn't good enough. They need more.
Rather than having the ability to improve and increase our programming for people living with and at increased risk for HIV, we're now having to figure out how we're going to just maintain what we're currently doing.
Infectious disease specialist Dr. Isaac Bogosh has worked extensively in the field of HIV prevention. He says community organizations are vital in the battle against HIV/AIDS.
It saves lives, right? They prevent people from getting HIV through their work, or they ensure people who are positive get a timely diagnosis and are placed on treatment in a timely manner so that they don't get sick and also reduce transmission to other people. Like, they do a lot of work.
Advocates are worried that a spike in HIV infection is looming due to a lack of testing during the pandemic. ACT says that upwards of 600 clients are at risk of losing access to their programming because of the reduced funding. Dale Manukduk, CBC News, Toronto.
Polls open at 9:30 a.m. across the province tomorrow. And as this election draws to a close, we want to take a closer look at what's important to voters. And tonight, we explore the issues that matter most to Indigenous people in the province. After a year in which unmarked graves were discovered at residential school sites across the country, reconciliation is a top issue for many Indigenous voters. That includes helping improve the lives of future generations as well. According to the federal government, in Ontario alone, there are more than 40 boil water advisories affecting 25 First Nations communities. Indigenous voters say They want to see more done to ensure people in their communities have access to clean drinking water. Well, for some insight, we're joined by Assembly of First Nations National Chief Roseanne Archibald. Thanks for making time for us this evening, Chief.
Hi, Mariville. Good to be here.
Nice to see you. I know during the election campaign, you identified 5 priorities that you wanted addressed, and that includes truth and reconciliation, climate change, as well as economic growth for First Nations communities. I'd like to know if you feel like any of them were addressed in the way you wanted in the campaign.
I don't think that Indigenous issues were given the amount of time that people wanted to have them, and not just First Nations people, but non-Indigenous voters as well. Our internal polling showed that the majority of Canadians wanted to hear from parties on what they were going to do in terms of reconciliation, and there wasn't enough discussion around that, not for voters and not for First Nations people.
So given that, and it seemed, as you say, identified as a priority across the country, Canadians, Indigenous people alike. So do you have a sense then of what the appetite would be for going to the polls in Indigenous communities?
Well, we are encouraging people to vote, and First Nations can make a big difference in this election in a number of ridings across Canada. And so we have been asking people to get out and vote, but not only the Assembly of First Nations, but other First Nation organizations across Canada have been doing the same. I just saw something out of Manitoba a few days ago. And then, of course, there have been individual kinds of movements, such as Tanya Cameron with Rock the Vote. Although that's definitely an NDP thing, there has been a real effort to get people out to vote.
And I know you've made it clear that you won't endorse any of the parties in the campaign because you're going to have to work with federal partners regardless of which party forms government. But how are you going to ensure that the voices of the Indigenous communities and yours as well will be heard and have that seat at the table?
You know, the election really interrupted an ongoing conversation about truth and reconciliation with the recovery of our little ones across this country and unmarked graves. And it's after the election, we're going to go back to those conversations. I mean, we need to keep talking about the path forward. We need to talk about healing. I mean, that's the name of the AFN document, the Healing Path Forward. It's not only for First Nations. Certainly, survivors and intergenerational survivors really need processes to ensure and facilitate ongoing healing. But I know that non-Indigenous Canadians as well are looking for that healing path forward. And an election really disrupted that, and we're just going to keep going forward with it after the election as well.
So in that spirit of trying to pick up where things left off before the election call, I'm curious to hear from you about how hopeful you are, given the heartbreak that has been experienced across the country, particularly in the past few months, whether you have a sense of optimism that things are going to get on that healing path forward.
You know me, I'm an eternal optimist. I always have been. And I know that the call for healing is one that can't be ignored. A healing process, whether it's a personal journey or the journey of this country or the journey of First Nations, continues moving forward. And as leaders, it's important for us to get together, facilitate that healing, and create processes that ensure that we can really walk that healing path forward together, because we can only get there together as Canadians, between First Nations and non-Indigenous Canadians.
Well, Chief Roseanne Archibald, appreciate your time tonight, and I look forward to speaking again as this journey continues.
Thank you, Mariville. Take care.
That was Assembly of First Nations National Chief Roseanne Archibald. We'll have more ahead. Stay with us. It was a special evening for some frontline workers in Toronto. A Canadian company for high-end kitchen appliances partnered with a Michelin pedigreed chef and threw a luxurious outdoor dinner for healthcare workers to honor them for their relentless service in the last 18 months of the pandemic. We spoke to the chef and a frontline worker about what this night meant to them.
Cooking today for frontline workers. They have been working effortlessly for the last year and a half, and we would just like to put them first tonight. We'd like to cook for them, we'd like to take care of them, and we'd like for them to enjoy their evening with their friends and family.
Really, it's an honor, especially after the last 18 months. It's been really tough, and so I'm really thrilled to be able to do something to celebrate, the healthcare workers, particularly in Toronto, who've worked really hard over the last 18 months.
Okay, Sophia, voters go to the polls tomorrow. Curious about what the weather is going to look like in the region.
Well, if they are summer weather lovers, it will be one last day of heat and humidity before a big autumnal pattern change with our first fall storm possible of the season. But until then, Monday, Election Day, will be very warm, summer-like heat and humidity, 23 feeling like 26 with an east wind coming off the lake. Fair skies for you on Monday morning. Brisk, though, if you are heading out to the polls Monday morning, and by the time we get into Monday afternoon, that heat and humidity will be pushing in with a southerly flow, especially if you're in the southwestern end, feeling like 34 in Windsor and feeling like 31 in Hamilton. A little bit more brisk, though, for those of you around the GTA with an east wind off the lake. So Monday afternoon will be a little bit cooler and brisk for those of you around the western edge of the GTA, with winds beginning to pick up, especially for the first half of this work week. And winds will be a really big part of the weather story into the long range forecast as well. For the first few days of the upcoming work week, winds will be very, very gusty, ushering in a frontal boundary that will set up shop on top of the Great Lakes Basin and drop a long duration rainfall event. We're talking about heavy rainfall embedded with storms Tuesday overnight into Wednesday. Really, right from Tuesday to Thursday, a soggy weather-like system. Our first fall storm of the season will be here. It's not out of the question for us to see upwards of 100 millimeters of rainfall between Tuesday to Thursday. Flooding is certainly a risk, and especially in urban areas. 100 millimeters of rainfall is enough to shake a stick at, especially when the ground is fairly saturated already. But until then, a really nice day for those of you. Monday into Tuesday, not a washout as well. That humidity will build Monday into Tuesday. For those of you in Election Day voting, picture perfect day before our first big fall storm and an autumnal pattern change midweek. Maribel.
All right. Thanks, Sophia.
You're welcome.
And that's our show for you tonight. Thanks for watching. And of course, as we finish the last weekend of summer, we're going to leave you with a look at people in Toronto soaking in the beautiful day. Good night, everyone.